Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most studied texts in human history, the Gospel of John. But we're not just reading it today, we are actually mapping it out. We're going to be looking at Pastor Jeevan Kishore Gurram's unique analytical framework, which is honestly just a brilliant way to visually and conceptually break down some pretty complex ancient literature. So, to make this incredibly dense text a bit more accessible, Pastor Gurram uses this really effective mnemonic device. It's the English word believe. It's basically a 7-point acrostic that's designed to structure the core theological themes woven all throughout the text. We're going to unpack this framework letter by letter today and see exactly how it functions as a sort of roadmap. Okay, here's our quick agenda for today. First up, the belief framework explained. Second, divinity and miraculous signs. Third is life, law, and identity. Fourth is victory of the cross. And finally, we'll wrap up with the entrusted mission.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the Believe Framework Explained, Mapping the Narrative Arc.
Before we even hit that first letter, we really got to look at the grand scale of this framework because it's massive. Pastor Gurram traces this sweeping cosmic timeline. I mean, it actually begins before the universe even existed, eternity past. From there, it zooms way into a highly localized earthly ministry in the 1st century AD, hits this dramatic climax at the cross, and then immediately follows up with the empty tomb. So this isn't just your standard historical biography, right? It's a narrative that's literally bridging eternity and human history.
Moving on to Section 2, Divinity and Miraculous Signs. Here we'll explore our first two letters, B and E.
So the framework kicks off with B, which stands for before creation. And what's really fascinating here is how it establishes identity literally right out of the gate. Pastor Gurram highlights that this text, it doesn't start with a genealogy or a birth narrative like you might expect. Instead, it asserts this profound claim, absolute divinity existing before the world was even formed. It's like everything that follows has to be viewed through this pre-existent lens.
And that massive foundation leads us straight to our first E, evidence through signs. Pastor Gurram's analysis draws this direct line from divine origins to earthly actions. In this framework, miracles aren't framed as, magic tricks or just random acts of kindness. No, they're tangible testimonies. They're carefully curated events designed to provide earthly proof of that exact divine nature we just talked about. It's evidence that essentially demands a verdict from anyone observing it.
Next up is Section 3, Life, Law, and Identity, where we're going to unpack the letters L and I. Now, as we move into the core earthly ministry part of the timeline, we hit a radical shift. L stands for Law Challenged by Life. And this brilliantly illustrates the central tension of the whole text, which is rigid, established rules on one side versus spiritual life and direct fellowship on the other. Pastor Gurram points out that the text presents this new life as a direct, head-on challenge to historical regulations. It's prioritizing a living, breathing relationship over just mechanical adherence to rules. And this heavy emphasis on a living relationship, it naturally brings us to I, which represents identity clarified. Because think about it, if the old law is being totally upended by this new way of living, it raises an immediate massive question. Wait, by whose authority? Who actually gets to clarify this entirely new paradigm? Well, according to the analysis, that identity is powerfully clarified through these incredibly bold I am declarations. Pastor Gurram points out that in this specific cultural context, saying I am isn't just grammar, right? It carries immense theological weight. It acts as a direct callback to the divine name revealed in the Old Testament. So statements like I am the bread of life serve as the ultimate clarification. It ties perfectly back to our starting point, that divine nature existing before creation.
All right, Section 4, Victory of the Cross, exploring the second E and the letter V.
So the framework is really pushing toward its dramatic climax now. The second E stands for empty tomb anticipated. And notice that word anticipated. It's key here. Pastor Gurram suggests the text doesn't treat the resurrection as some sort of surprise twist ending. Not at all. It's treated as an expected, totally inevitable outcome. The ultimate power conquering death was promised and practically built into the narrative long before the event actually took place. And because that empty tomb is fully anticipated, it completely flips how we view the letter V. Victory through the cross. This is such a fascinating structural pivot to me. In this framework, the cross isn't analyzed as a tragic defeat or some fleeting moment of weakness.
It is a triumphant victory. The mission was accomplished precisely through this event. It essentially transforms a symbol of execution into one of absolute ultimate triumph.
Which brings us to Section 5, the entrusted mission, focusing on our final E.
We finally arrived at the conclusion of both the acrostic and the timeline. This final E represents the entrusted mission because, as Pastor Gurram identifies, the narrative doesn't just end with a victory lap, it ends with a handoff. The text closes by placing a really heavy responsibility squarely onto the shoulders of the followers. The divine work is technically completed, but the earthly service, well, that's really just beginning.
When you lay out the final stages of this framework, this really brilliant logical sequence emerges. Step 1, grasp the divine identity. Step 2, recognize the cross as victory. And that naturally forces Step 3, accept the entrusted responsibility. The framework basically argues that you literally cannot logically reach that final step of the mission without fully understanding and believing those first 2 steps.
So as we wrap up this explainer, we can really see how the Believe acronym takes what is honestly a multi-layered ancient text and turns it into a highly digestible flow of ideas. It takes the reader from eternity past straight into personal, everyday responsibility. So we want to leave you with this to ponder. How does analyzing this text through such a structured 7-point framework actually alter the way believers carry out that mission in the modern world? Does viewing the cross strictly as a victory and miracles strictly as evidence change the daily approach to this ancient text? Think about it. Thanks for exploring this with us today. Keep questioning, keep analyzing, and keep learning.